People on the ground are by no means the only people seeing UFOs. Civilian and commercial airline pilots are also seeing unexplained aerial phenomena. Aircraft pilots must rank among the most credible type of witnesses due to their extensive training, keen eyesight, and familiarity in identification of other terrestrial aircraft. Unfortunately, hundreds, if not thousands, of commercial aviation pilot sightings go unreported due to concerns most commercial carriers have about the negative publicity that might result if it became publicly known that their senior pilots were seeing strange, unidentifiable vehicles in their airspace. No other scientist in the world has done more research into pilot sightings and personally investigated more reports than retired NASA research scientist and author Dr. Richard F. Haines. Dr. Haines has provided us with 4 cases of UFO involvement with airline operations. We have also included 3 recordings of the original air traffic control transmissions involving airline pilot UFO sightings. These recordings were obtained through the Freedom of Information Act and provided by my good friend Peter Davenport of the National UFO Reporting Center. And now the menu above will give you real pilots reporting strange, luminous flying machines in their midst.
My name is Richard Haines, and I've been a NASA research scientist since the mid-60s. I started my research in the area of visual perception and optics and lighting, and studying some problems for the Gemini program, the 2-man capsule program. It was orbital. And during the early stages of that research, I had a laboratory which would allow me to simulate the way things look to the astronauts in outer space. And I could totally fool the observer. I could set up a situation that he or she could not accurately describe. The shape and size and distance of targets would just be under my control. I could set up a triangular-shaped target, and what you would see is a circle. I could set up a rectangle, a 4-to-1 rectangle, and you'd see a hot dog, because of light scatter within the human eye. Well, I set out to disprove UFO as anything mystical or very, very strange, because I was able to do this in the laboratory. I could allow you to misidentify something. And so I set out to disprove the whole thing as a skeptic. Well, it wasn't very long before I realized that I was wrong, that in fact these phenomena are not misidentified natural phenomena. So some of them are, but not very many. And one thing led to another, and I was led into talking with pilots, and I've been specializing in pilot sightings ever since. One of the cases that I think you'll find very interesting involved a Japan Airlines cargo flight. The captain was Kenji Teruchi. He had several other men with him on this flight from Paris to Tokyo, following the polar route. They took off from Paris, as I said. They flew to Keflavik, Iceland for fuel, and then on to Anchorage. However, coming over the border of Canada into Alaska at cruise altitude on a dark night on autopilot, he described, and his first officer described, seeing a very strange set of lights. The first thing they saw were flickering yellow lights almost in a row, horizontal row, which they thought were afterburners of military jets ahead of them, like they were in trail behind a military flight. And that made some sense. However, it went from the 12 o'clock position very quickly off to about the 10 o'clock position, and then maintained the 10 o'clock relative to his bearing, and then moved back again to approximately the 12 o'clock position. Well, jet planes don't do that quickly. They don't move that rapidly. And so he began to be a little concerned that it wasn't what he thought it was. It was about his altitude. The stars were very bright. The air was crystal clear. He said he could see Fairbanks 100 and some miles ahead of him. It was so clear. Well, continuing on, this, by the way, was November 17th, 1986. He has not started to come down yet. He's still at cruise altitude. He said then they noticed, generally ahead of them, a very large object outlined against the light of the sky, and he described it as being the length of at least 2 aircraft carriers end to end. That's very large. They continue on, perhaps Mach 0.8, and they pass over the city of Fairbanks. And he says to himself, and then to the crew, I'm going to ask permission to execute a turn, so that if this is another airplane off to my left-hand side now, this large object, it will just continue on and leave us alone. He dials in a coordinated right-hand turn, and he told me that as he's going around this 360-degree turn, the object stays right off his left wing at some unknown distance. Well, for an object to do that, another airplane to do that, it has to accelerate up to a new speed and then maintain that new speed to maintain separation distance and relative position. As he continues around the 360 and then he comes out on his original heading now to Anchorage, which is his destination, the object is there right beside him. He has not found a way to get rid of the object. It's right beside him at his speed. Well, he told me that he starts descending altitude about halfway to Anchorage, approximately. And he knows that there is another aircraft that has taken off from Anchorage coming up to Fairbanks, which will be passing him on the left-hand side. And they are now climbing up to altitude, and I think about 15 or 20 miles east of Captain Terrucci's location. And he's now letting down in altitude to land. And he told me that just when he contacted the other captain coming the other direction and said, would you flash your landing lights and I'll do the same so they can identify each other, he said as soon as he flashed the 747 landing lights, all of the lights on this unknown object went out, just instantaneously. And I don't believe very many people know that. Well, the other captain rising in altitude didn't see anything. He never saw any lights or object moving or anything like that. He did see Terrucci's plane. I think a very interesting postscript to this event involving this Japan Airlines 747 is what happened to Captain Terrucci after he landed. Well, because of his report, his conscientiousness to fill out a report form, and all the paperwork that goes with it, he was evaluated by the medical board of Japan Airlines, and he was asked to terminate his flying duties. Well, that's rather unfortunate. He's a good pilot. He's an excellent pilot. And so I happened to have an opportunity to talk with the medical director of Japan Airlines as he was visiting here in the States. And I asked him about Captain Terrucci and explained that I had done this analysis on the case, and I was very impressed with him as a pilot. He informed me at that time that he was no longer flying. But he did invite me to submit materials to the airline explaining what I had learned. Well, I did that. Many months went by, and I learned later on that he had been reinstated. He is now flying again. I was very glad to hear that. One of the facts I brought out in my material was that Captain Terrucci was a good pilot. He was an outstanding pilot. He maintained control of the airplane at all times. He landed on time. He delivered his cargo. He complied with all the requirements. He's playing it by the book. And yet, this happened to him. I also pointed out that what he saw in the sky was really not all that unusual, that I have thousands of other cases from around the world going back many years which describe very large objects that perform amazing feats.
I'm Neil Daniels, and retired airline captain. I've been flying airplanes since 1936, and I've flown everything from single-place sailplanes up to captain on 747s. My logbook shows well over 30,000 hours of flying time. And this incident happened when I was flying as captain on a DC-10. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening. We were about halfway between Buffalo, New York, and Albany on what they call J94 Airways. The airplane was flying on the autopilot, on the first officer's autopilot. It was his turn to fly. I was doing the radio commentary and talking to air traffic control, and all of a sudden the airplane started a left turn, a bank about 20 degrees off course. Air traffic control in Boston asked us what our intentions were. I said, well, as soon as we figure out what it is, we'll let you know. And so we all looked to the left at that time, and there was this very bright, very brilliant light object off to the left of the aircraft. It's hard to determine not just how far away it was or anything at night, but it did disrupt all three compasses on the aircraft, and this is what the concern was. Normally that doesn't happen. So the first officer looked at this object, and the flight engineer got out of his seat and looked out the window behind me and saw it. And we turned the autopilot off and proceeded to go back on course towards Albany. I asked air traffic control if they had any objects showing on their radar off the left wing, and their answer was negative. They didn't have any. I turned my attention back to the object as it moved back behind the wing back to about our 8 o'clock position, and then all of a sudden at a very high rate of speed it disappeared back and away from the aircraft and out of sight. And that was the brief incident, but there was something there that I didn't really understand.
Here's a very interesting case involving an L-1011 commercial aircraft flying from San Francisco to JFK on July 4th, 1981. It had a full crew on board, obviously, and a lot of passengers in the back. It was about 4:45 in the afternoon. They were at 37,000 feet altitude over Lake Michigan. They had just left Minneapolis Control, clear sunny day, and Captain Schultz, who was a Korean War combat pilot veteran, by the way, was just relaxing, looking outside, looking for other traffic, as he should. He noticed something caught his eye, approximately 30 degrees left and 30 degrees high. And so he leaned forward a little bit in order to see it better, because he thought it might be another aircraft approaching on a collision course. Well, much to his surprise, as he's pointing it out to his first officer, by the way, what they both see is a round, kind of a disc-shaped metallic object with no markings, no seams, but 6 evenly spaced black circles along its edge, its circumference. Well, the airplane is flying approximately Mach 0.82, about 470 knots true. And the object descends to his altitude from above and does a very high-speed turn and then goes away towards Canada, in the direction of Canada.
Picture the brightest, shiniest silver that you've ever seen and multiply that 100 times to get how shiny this object is. It came from right over here. And now look up here again. Here it is. And then I can now see the windows, and I can see the edge of the roof and the slope of the roof. As the sun strikes it, it goes by like this, but there it's traveling so fast, the windows are a blur. They're like a black stripe on the side, and then it tilts down like this, and then it just goes, and not in any relationship to any plane on Earth.
I met the captain in San Francisco Airport and took some equipment along, and we recreated that event with the aircraft on the ground, of course. And I had him sit exactly where he sat. I had him take a grease pencil and mark up some plastic that we put over the windows. And in doing all that, we were able to reconstruct the flight path of the object relative to the airplane. Now, why can we do that? Because the autopilot was on at all times maintaining straight and level flight, so that the motions of the UFO were relative to the cockpit outline, the windows, for instance. Well, what did we find? We found that the UFO, whatever it was, approached at approximately 1,000 miles an hour. It did a very high-speed turn, approximately 20 Gs at least, and then went away from the aircraft at about 1,000 miles an hour in a climb. Well, we don't know of any other aircraft that can do that, and ended up looking like an oblate spheroid. I looked up sun angle, and the solar reflections were consistent with a three-dimensional, large, reflecting object. The captain told me that at the time that the object was closest to his aircraft, he felt a shock wave, a slight shudder, if you will. It was a very interesting case. He got right on the radio, as he should, and radioed Minneapolis, and do you have any traffic up near us? And they said, no, we do not. He has never seen anything before. He has never seen anything since, and he's turned into a believer. This man who, before this happened, told me that he just didn't believe these things could exist. Now he does. And I said, Captain, about how big was the object? It was no way to tell, of course, because size-distance relationships are very misleading. But he said he had the impression it was very, very large. The size of a baseball stadium, 50,000 people, very large. Well, if that's true, it raises some very interesting and fundamental questions. Air resistance, energy, shock wave, propulsion, fundamental questions that science should take a look at. So, in conclusion, that's a great case, credible witness, two witnesses actually, professional pilots up front. There was no electromagnetic effects, the compasses did not deviate in this case, no radar contact, just the memories of two professionals. This event took place October 21st, 1978, out of Melbourne, Australia. It achieved worldwide attention here in America as well. A young pilot named Valentich was flying by himself in a rented Cessna 182 long-range model. He took off in the evening en route over Bass Strait, which is out over the ocean south of Australia, to go to King Island. He's going to land, refuel, buy some crayfish, and then come back with the crayfish that night. Well, what happens is he gets approximately 6 minutes out over Bass Strait, which is now pitch dark, and he sees a very strange lighted object ahead of him that hovers above him, that disappears instantaneously, and then reappears in a new location, which is a long shape. He said, Melbourne, I've got a long shape. It's got a green light. Would you know what kind of aircraft I've got? Well, this radio tape, which lasts 14 minutes, really constitutes all the evidence there is on this case. And I've done an analysis of that voice tape and reconstructed the event. Valentich disappeared at the end of this event and has never been found. It's a very fascinating case because of all of the challenges to understanding what might have happened at a distance, in this case in Australia, from here in America. The search and rescue operation went into effect the next morning. He did not arrive on time, and so automatically the authorities set up an SAR, it's called, Search and Rescue Operation. The Royal Australian Air Force got into gear and flew P-3 search planes. His friends at the air club mounted an effort and took off and flew crisscross patterns and so forth the next day, several days actually. They could find nothing. No wreckage has ever been found. The long-range model Cessna had flotation tanks in the wings in various parts of the fuselage. So something should show up sooner or later on a beach. And the parts of the aircraft fuselage have serial numbers stamped into them. And so sooner or later, something should show up, but nothing ever did. I think it's important to ask the question, why would a young man who has an aviation career ahead, perhaps in the Air Force, perhaps commercial, why would he make up a story about some strange objects outside his aircraft unless it was true, unless he was simply describing what he saw?
This recording is being prepared by Boston Air Route Traffic Control Center. The subject concerns a Freedom of Information Act request involving UFO sightings.